the reality is China has not particularly supplied Russia with the array of military equipment that Putin perhaps wanted. And the fact that Russia's had to go to Iran and North Korea is testimony, actually, to the fact that China has not stepped up and helped Russia particularly. And I think it's interesting here because the many people I think were worried about how China would play out the war, and I think it's testimony to the fact that despite that alliance between Russia and China without limits, actually for China the key relationship is not with Russia, it's with the US, right? And the Chinese actually have more or less complied with Western sanctions on Russia, which is quite extraordinary, really. And I think it relates to the fact that actually the Chinese don't want to further undermine that relationship with the US by going overboard in supporting Russia. Well, Russia has gone on to a war economy, right? That's certainly, the guns versus butter, paradigm. We are interestingly seeing, shortages of labor in Russia, which is reflected in high inflation. So, difficult decisions have had to be made, definitely. But going back to the fact that Putin knew he was going to invade, he built buffers. There's a lot of buffers and durability in the Russian economy that have certainly helped them. I mean, Putin historically has always, tended to hire technocrats in key positions, right? So you have a very credible central bank, it's very orthodox in how it conducts monetary and economic policy. Same for the Ministry of Finance, right? I mean, you have capable people in key positions. You could probably dispute that when it comes to the military. I mean, the way Russia has conducted the war right from the first invasion has been, pretty chaotic and not very credible and very good. They've learned, certainly. But in the economic sphere, for Putin's, the duration of Putin's stay in office, he has appointed capable people in key positions, and macro policy in general has been pretty prudent and orthodox, and certainly that's helped with the conduct of the war.
But he needs arms still. I mean, that's still a massive factor for Russia. I mean, the very fact that he's doing deals with North Korea of kind of arms for oil would suggest that that is a massive issue in terms of how the Russian war economy is working.
No, absolutely. Sanctions are making it difficult for Russia to get the key inputs to its munitions. We need to do more. There are too many gaps. Too many third countries are helping Russia get around it. But, there's obviously been lots of concern about China and, whether China would step up and, you have this, alliance without borders or limits. Obviously that was the agreement signed between Putin and Xi in Beijing during the period of the Winter Olympics in early 22, just before the invasion. The reality is China has not particularly supplied Russia with the array of military equipment that Putin perhaps wanted. And the fact that Russia's had to go to Iran and North Korea is testimony, actually, to the fact that China has not stepped up and helped Russia particularly. And I think it's interesting here because many people I think were worried about how China would play out the war, and I think it's testimony to the fact that despite that alliance between Russia and China without limits, actually for China the key relationship is not with Russia, it's with the US, right? And the Chinese actually have more or less complied with Western sanctions on Russia, which is quite extraordinary, really. And I think it relates to the fact that actually the Chinese don't want to further undermine that relationship with the US by going overboard in supporting Russia. So they've been really, really careful, and that's helped the West in its efforts in terms of sanctions around Russia. Interestingly, it's also remarkably improved the US-China relationship. Sorry, the US-China relationship, which there's been obviously a lot of focus on that since the Trump presidency, Biden taking office. We had that terrible Anchorage summit between Tony Blinken and his counterpart. But actually, where we are, because of the war in Ukraine, is perhaps a better US-China relationship than it would otherwise have been, because Americans are respecting the fact that the Chinese have not gone all in support of Russia in this war. And again, that's certainly helped the Ukrainians.
Let's return to how we started this conversation, Timothy, and your general frustration still that the West isn't doing as much as it could be when it comes to seizing Russian assets and going further with sanctions. So if you were in charge of drawing up Western sanctions, fresh Western sanctions on Russia, what would be your immediate priorities?
Well, one, give Ukraine full access to the $330 billion of immobilized Russian assets. That would trump-proof Ukraine's financing. It would cover at least 2 years of financing for the Ukrainians, assuming $150 billion is needed to win the war, right? They could buy their own munitions globally, right? So that would resolve the issue of like almost every month, every 2 months, having to sit down and talk about how we're going to cover Ukraine's financing needs. Secondly, I would go for a zero tolerance for the West around trade with Russia. I would send the message out that on a longer term perspective, Western companies should aim to go to zero in terms of trading with Russia unless they have specific licenses to do so. So I accept that some products that we get from Russia are critical. You can't get them elsewhere. We perhaps do need to import some. Well, okay, they can go on special licenses. But I think the message to Western and international business should be that Putin's regime is a fascist regime. It's conducting war crimes and genocide in Ukraine. It's a threat to the security of Europe and the Western alliance. You should not be doing any business with Russia if at all you can get away with it. And I think that would really tighten the screw around Russia. It would send a very strong signal to third countries like India, like Turkey, like China, like Dubai, that you shouldn't be, or UAE, you shouldn't be doing business with Russia. And I would, really crack the whip around secondary sanctions. Actually sanction those third country entities that are facilitating sanctions busting via the Russians. Make an example of some of those companies in those countries and be very aggressive with them. So send an absolutely crystal clear signal that they should not be helping Russia in the conduct of this war.
And just finally, is the Russian economy Putin's Achilles heel? If he were to be ousted from power in some kind of internal coup, would it be more likely because of concerns with the state of the Russian economy as opposed to battlefield failures in Ukraine?
I guess what we've seen is there is still this durability. So unless we are willing to go the extra mile and be very aggressive in terms of our sanctions pursuit of Russia, in terms of helping the Ukrainians, in terms of financing, then actually there is, unfortunately, quite a lot of durability there, right? It's a slow grind. We continue to undermine Russia's ability to conduct the war, but we're not willing to impart the killer blow. And I think still, the battlefield ultimately is where it plays out most evidently. But I think by keeping a tight noose around Russia on the economic sphere, we do limit his options, on the battlefield. I mean, we certainly help the battlefield effort of the Ukrainians.
Thank you for watching today's episode of Frontline. For early access to our videos, member-only Q&As and live streams, then sign up for a membership via the link in the description. And for the latest news and breaking stories, listen to Times Radio and follow us at thetimes.com.